Hello and welcome to A Jew Today with Israel Forever. I'm Dr. Elana Heideman, and I am so honored tonight to have as my guest Rabbi David Wolpe, who is the Max Web Emeritus Rabbi of Sinai Temple and loved and listened to by many who cherish his inspirational wisdom. It is a great pleasure to have you. You've taught at a bunch of different institutions. You've spoken around the world. You've done so many things. And here you are speaking with our global community tonight.
Finally,
Rabbi Wolpe,
culmination.
so
It's all been leading up to this.
Oh, well, the honor is ours. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Happy to.
Well, you and I share a one common love, and we have both been the students of the esteemed Elie Wiesel, whose voice continues to carry through time, and he speaks to us today. And those of us who are blessed by that encounter continue to do what we can to make sure that his voice is not forgotten. I remember what you wrote on the occasion of his passing, and it struck me. So I wanted to share that. Hearing Wiesel speak was like listening to the whisper of eternity. His voice had a haunting magic, speaking words that were wrung from the suffering of his own soul and his indelible witness to the suffering of others. Even when he discussed something lighthearted, it had gravity. His recounting had a soft eloquence that made it much more, his words illuminating about human nature and human need. I'd love to open our discussion tonight by asking, what are the echoes of Elie's teachings that have been most internalized by you and that you have carried on throughout your life with the echoes of that beautiful voice we benefited from learning?
So, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about him, and also for the opportunity to talk to your group and your audience. And I would say there are two kinds of lessons that I learned from him. Some that I don't put into practice, but I know that I should, and some that have helped affect my practice. The one that I don't put into practice anywhere near the way that he was able to is he had an extraordinary gift for friendship. He was able to reach out to so many people who felt close to him that they couldn't all actually have been that close to him, but he had this sense of he made you feel like you were his very close friend and confidant. I will never forget. I mean, I knew him very little, is the truth, when I took the position at Sinai Temple, and there was a handwritten note from him welcoming me to the synagogue and wishing me well. And I just thought, it's amazing to me, considering what his incoming must have been and his responsibilities, that he thought to do that. And I wish I had anything like that breadth and graciousness, but that was a really important personal lesson, that here was somebody who was arguably as important as anyone in the world and still took the time to write to a young rabbi on an occasion of taking a position. The thing that I hope I've incorporated better is his constant counsel against indifference, and his courage that we can all draw from in speaking the truth, even when it was hard and uncomfortable to do so, as when he went to the Bitburg Cemetery and said to the president, "This is not your place." And so I think that all of us who learned from him understood that he felt that the debt he owed to all those whom he had left behind was so enormous that no living person could overmatch that debt or overwhelm him or cause him to say something he didn't believe, because he felt them all at his back. And that's it's a very powerful lesson for us all.
It is, and it's a lesson that I recall in the in the early months of the war that you yourself replicated when you spoke, shall we say, truth to power, as he had done in situation after situation. You had made a statement when there was an agreement with the absolute blood libel of Israel committing a genocide. where you had said, Madam Vice President, the idea that Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinian is not someone's truth, it's someone's lie. And I think that that's such an important, not only the act of addressing this leader, but also calling them out where their behaviors and their words are wrong. Do you think that your words were received? And why does this genocide lie continue, even though people are speaking truth to these powerful individuals?
So there are two separate questions in a way. Whether your words are received by the people to whom they are addressed is one part of it, but the fact that they speak to people who see them is another. So even if they're not heard by the person in power, I mean, I still was influenced by the words that Wiesel spoke to President Reagan. Whether Reagan heard them or not, I sure did, and so did millions and millions and millions of other people. So when you speak publicly, you always have to remember that you're not only speaking to the person to whom you are speaking. And the genocide lie persists for, first of all, because of the ubiquity of social media, because we know, for example, that close to 90 to 95% of the content on TikTok is anti-Israel, where it addresses the Israel conflict, obviously. And that's partly by design. After all, it is a platform that is owned by a country that is hostile to Israel's interests. And also because pictures are very powerful. And so some of what I'm saying is some of the lie is well-intentioned. These are people who have just learned things that aren't true or seen images that are hard to shake, and the image overrides the question. And also, let me just say something to fellow Jews and Israelis. How much do you know about Nagorno-Karabakh or about Kashmir? Like, Jews always make the assumption that everyone must understand all the things about Israel that we understand about Israel. But we don't know that much about other places in the world, and we make snap judgments about them. So realize that a lot of this is ignorance and not malevolence. A lot of it is, this is what all my friends say, this is what I see on media, so it must be true. Then, of course, you add to that that there's a lot of malevolence. So both malevolence towards Jews, anti-Semitism, and towards the entire Western civilizational project. And all of that, put all of that together, and you get this avalanche of animosity towards Israel and derivatively towards the Jewish people.
And I think part of the dilemma here is that there are facts to disprove, and they have been disproven again and again and again, and there is no international court of law, even, no matter how many attempts, that have been able to hold this claim of justice. So the naivete is balanced by, again, an empty abyss of lack of evidence. The photographs that you mentioned that many of them are seeing are actually manufactured from other massacres, whether it's in Syria or even pictures being used from the Holocaust. So what can we do? Because even if it is because of their peer pressure, where their friends are doing it, or maybe they're even, and we know that this is happening, where they're paid to be at these, protests and saying these words, and they're given their scripts, they don't really know what they're believing. But what happens next?
Okay, let me be brutally honest. First of all, some of the lies are abetted by some of the stupid things that have been said by members of the government that are quoted then at the genocide court as if they are the program of Israel. And that's one thing that, in that sense, there are some members of the government that have not helped disprove these lies. In fact, they've said things that give people ammunition to increase them. And second, yes, some of the pictures are manufactured, but some of them are real. There's real destruction and death and multiple funerals of families in Gaza, and all of that is real. And in order to understand why that is happening, you have to know something about the conflict. And to know something about the conflict, you have to care about information. So you have to realize that Hamas uses its own citizens as human shields. And you have to know that, in fact, the citizens of Gaza voted for Hamas, which then overcame the PA in a bloody semi-coup, and all those things that you and I know and take for granted. And so we see what happens in its true light and perspective, but it is so easy to remove a fact or two, or to not care about a fact or two, or to be on the team that you've chosen, and therefore to ignore the facts because you're going to be on the anti-Israel team. And then there you are. It's all laid out in front of you. So when you say, what can we do about it? The sad fact is that you can't change someone's mind by just throwing facts at them. We know this. We've done all these studies that show that an accumulation of fact is not enough to change somebody's mind. It takes actually long, patient listening and dialogue. It happens gradually. It happens over time. And so what I would say is there is no magic bullet. We have to just continue to tell the truth. And the analogy that I sometimes use for Jewish audiences who are as frustrated as you and I are about everything that we see is what the Kotzker Rebbe says about the Shema. He says, in the Shema, it says these words should be al levavecha, on your heart. And they ask, why on your heart? It should be in your heart. And his answer is that hearts aren't always open. But as long as the words are there, when your heart is open, they'll sink in. So if we keep repeating the truth, at a certain point, I really believe that people will start to recognize, and if I can draw, again, one, it's not exactly an analogy, but like, it almost seems, I hope it's not too late, that Europe is waking up. And they're saying, oh my God, we have this huge civilizational threat here of radical Islam that we didn't really take seriously. And maybe once the world awakens to the fact that, oh yes, these actually have been Israel's neighbors now since before it was founded, they might start to see this in a different light. That's going to take I'm afraid, a lot of time and a lot of heartache and a lot of pain, but that's my hope.
Do you think that those who are on campuses right now, especially utilizing the genocide lie, the occupationist lie, how do you envision, because they are not interested in dialogue, and every interview with anyone on campus has shown us that, but what we're seeing is also these types of behaviors being moved off of campus. It is no longer relegated, and people are unprepared in spite of over a decade of really campus anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and flat out propaganda-driven lies. Where is it going to lead? Is that violent spirit able to be quashed in your mind? Is that these people are not interested in dialogue when they're holding up their Nazi flags and when they're holding up signs that says, kill all the hostages? I mean, this is real dressed as terrorists marching in the streets with Hamas headbands. Where's it going to go? Dialogue isn't going to stop that.
Do you want my optimistic answer?
I like them both. I think we really should dissect
so
it.
Here's I'll give you my optimistic one. I will give you my optimistic answer. You'll tell me if it tracks at all. Okay. So in some ways, the most hopeful thing I heard all year long, in a year of like desperately listening for hopeful things, was Fareed Zakaria, who's a cultural commentator and political commentator on CNN. So he wrote in one of his columns, when I was at Harvard, people were writing columns in favor of Pol Pot, the communist dictator. He said, and now all those people run hedge funds. And I thought maybe part of this will just be outgrown. And I think that will be true for some people. They'll just we were all stupid at 20. That's just part of being 20. And some of them will just outgrow it. And also, by the way, a lot of them who were there, the vast majority of students on campus just wanted a career. They just wanted to go work at Goldman Sachs. They were not actually involved in the protests. So it's as always, a very vocal and activist minority that drives the agenda. So that's my optimistic side. The pessimistic side is that there were enough faculty and there's enough cultural currency in America, and there's enough Mideastern influence to make this more lasting than something that will just disappear. And so I think that we have, I mean, it sounds very grand to put it this way, but we have a kind of civilizational battle on our hands. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be short. And the divides, you know, all the kind of divides that we used to have, they're all shifting. What was left and right and so on and so forth, they're not the same as they used to be. And somebody asked me recently in an event that I was doing in Toronto, like, what has changed for you? And I said, I've sort of become more binary. You know, my first question is, are you an anti-Zionist or are you a Zionist? That's my first question to place you politically in the world. And that wasn't, it wasn't as much on my radar, you know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, certainly not 10 or 20 years ago, because there were so many other issues, and I just sort of took it for granted that the vast majority of people understood Israel's, you know, project in the world. So I don't know what will be. I do know this: human beings are really, really terrible prophets. We're awful at predicting the future. The future constantly surprises us. Like, think about all the, you know, the debates over judicial reform, and everybody thought this is what Israel is about. And then all of a sudden overnight, that wasn't what Israel was about. The day before the Soviet Union collapsed, I remember, I was old enough to remember, nobody thought the Soviet Union was going to collapse. So when we predict the future, we generally extrapolate from the present, and the future often surprises us.
I think it's interesting to look to the future through a lens of the past, and to say, what are the patterns that we are repeating that were mistakes in previous generations of leaders that were, you know, we know that in the late 1920s and the early 1930s, there were warning signs, and there were elections that went this way and that way, and it took 18 years between, you know, between all of the different phases before it showed its truly ugly, violent face. Do you think that there's any lessons that we should be looking at? That, and I know that, you know, Elie very much incorporated the past errors as Jews. What can we do to apply ourselves more greatly today, using, you know, using that understanding we can gain from looking back? And I know your father was involved in the Soviet Jewry rally with Wiesel.
He was very much involved. He was very much involved.
I can only imagine, as a young child, you're watching your father be a leader, be involved in this movement, and that's an impact it has on you.
You know what?
So you're
Do you know what the biggest
lessons.
impact in some ways was about the Soviet Jewry movement in particular? That my parents, you know, smuggled Bibles and tefillin into the Soviet Union, and I just thought, my parents, who were the last people on earth to smuggle something, that they became smugglers. I thought, like, this is something I have to understand this, because this is obviously not a normal situation. And what I would say is, the first thing for Jews to remember is we have a long history. It's not true that the only historical lessons we should learn are from World War II. We tend to only look at World War II as though that's our history. We have a long history and a complicated history. And one of the things that we learn from our history is that we are much better at identifying enemies than we are at embracing friends. And that we have many, many allies if we would reach out to them and tell them how much we value them. And let me give you an example about this. So I was on a panel with Van Jones, who is a commentator from CNN. And he said he went to 140 Black leaders, business leaders in Atlanta. And he said to them, the Jews were there for us when we needed them, and now we have to be there for the Jews when they need us. And he said, you know what their reaction was? I'll give your listeners a minute, pause for a minute, think what their reaction was, and then I'll tell you, because it stunned me. Their reaction was, someone needs us? They had never been told they were needed before. The Black community would say they were needed. but nobody ever said, like, we're hurting, we need you. And as Jews, we don't sort of admit our vulnerability to other groups and say, we say, we expect you, or why don't you do what we think you should do? But part of it is being able to express our genuine need and our hurt, not just our anger and our pride. That's one of the lessons that I learned from all this. Is that we have many, many people who will stand with us if we ask them to stand with us. And you would say, well, shouldn't they do it anyway? And the answer is, most things, as you learn when you're a fundraiser, people sometimes are very willing to give you money, but they don't think about it until you ask them. And so we can't expect that people will show up for us if we don't ask them to do it. And I really encourage Jews to speak to their non-Jewish friends and tell them how much the Jewish community is hurting and how much we really need the non-Jewish community to stand with us and say to the world, these are our friends and these are our allies and we support Israel and we care about them. So that's one lesson from the past that I think is critically important. Don't forget that the people who defeated Nazi Germany were called the Allies. So we need more allies, and they are there and they are ready. And the other, I think the Jewish community is learning from our experience, which is I really do see many, many Jews stand up in ways that they had not before after October 7th. I just spent an evening at the GA with Sheryl Sandberg. She was not particularly involved in Jewish charities, and yet she made a film about sexual abuse and Hamas on October 7th because she calls herself a born-again Jew. She was awakened by the reality of what anti-Semitism was in the world. And so I think that these lessons are being learned. And the principal lesson, of course, is Wiesel's, I don't know that it's his greatest lesson, but certainly one of his most enduring lessons, which is that the opposite of love isn't hate, the opposite of love is indifference. And Jews can't be indifferent. And I have seen many, many Jews shaken out of their indifference by October 7th. And that part of it is the silver lining. You know, Abba Eban used to say that Jews like clouds without silver linings, but that was a silver lining.
Yeah. I think that there's been a few silver linings that have come out, also an awareness of the importance of Israel for Jewish life. That was also,
Absolutely.
as you mentioned earlier, completely taken for granted and continues to be taken for granted, such as by these young students and the young Jews who are out of their own, defiance and anti-authoritarianism are going to do everything possible to deny any justice that this war might be serving. Everybody, doesn't matter what side of the spectrum you're on, we're all anti-war.
Yeah.
And we all want peace.
Yeah. Can I actually say something about that?
People forget that simple fact.
I just posted this today. I have a friend in Israel. His name is Evan Fallenberg. He's a writer and a translator, wonderful guy. And last time I was in Israel, I've been in Israel a couple times since October 7th. The second time I was there, I was sitting with him and I was talking, and he told me he has a son who's serving in Gaza. And he said, and many of his friends have a sign on their door that says, do not knock, because they know what a knock means. I mean, you know what a knock means, but it means that someone from the army is coming to tell you. So if you want to call first, you want to text first and come over, fine, but don't knock, because that knock alone freezes the heart in a way that they can't recover from. And anybody who thinks that these parents want their children to be serving where they could be maimed or injured or killed is an idiot. They're only doing it because they know they have to protect the state of Israel. But people who think that Israel, that they're warmongers and they want war, they have never met a parent who has to send their kid off to the army in Israel. And they're either completely misguided or malevolent.
And probably a little bit naive as to that type of pride that comes in being one of the watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem. And for generations, we have learned about the wars of Jews fighting for Jerusalem and our land. And we have seen that for 2,000 years until the creation even of the state. And so, but now we see such an apathy and an indifference for our defense forces and how important they are. But if we think that this silver lining, as you mentioned, one of them could be an awakening amongst diaspora Jewish families, that they have to teach their own children to have greater respect for the soldier, the moral foundations of how the soldier is expected to behave. And and I'm not excusing any extremist on any side for their language, whether taken out of context or not, but we have to stand unified with the defensive actions of trying to uproot terror. Do you think it's possible for American Jewish families to grasp that when they don't, like you, have a friend with a son in Gaza, or like me, who has an entire community and one fallen every day? There is a knock on the door.
I think it is very hard. Here's the principal fact about America. I can explain America's uniqueness in 4 words: Canada, Mexico, ocean, ocean. Americans are insulated from the history of the world. They don't have any enemies on their borders, and most of them don't travel. And the ones that travel generally travel to countries that are not under, so Italy also right now doesn't have any enemies on its borders. And they don't appreciate you. When you bring Americans for the first time to Israel and you say, see that over there? That's Jordan. They go, what? What are you talking about? That's Jordan right there. How could that be Jordan? Because they have literally sometimes never seen a border in their lives. So when you ask me, is it possible to do? I think actually, I'm not so sure that it is possible to do. You got to get American Jewish kids to Israel. So because there is no substitute for experience, it's too abstract to say, don't you realize what it's like, to have missiles rain down on you, for every home to have a mamad, for everybody to always need to be ready at any moment to go into a safe room, to have a country like Iran that could literally cover the entire nation with ballistic missiles. And they're just words. So I think that human beings have a very hard time envisioning being in situations that are radically different from their own. And that's why I think that all these programs to bring kids to Israel, to bring adults to Israel, for people to see it, for people to, one of the most powerful experiences that you can have, which I actually had recently when I was going, I took a helicopter from Jerusalem to Haifa, and to just fly over Israel and see right up the Mediterranean. Yes, it's it's tiny.
But see, here's the dilemma, Rabbi. Here's the dilemma. What we've outlined is how easy it is to arouse, shall we call it, radical empathy for the poor Gazans suffering the horrible war that Israel has brought, which they have not, because we are only taking out the terror infrastructure, actually losing our own soldiers in order to protect civilian lives. Yes. If Israel didn't care about civilian lives, this war should have been over October 8th. But that's not the nation we are. But what we're saying is that everybody, including our own people, have such radical empathy for Gazans, Palestinians, call them what you will, but not for Israelis. Not for we have no humanitarian effort that is provided for us. I am constantly, and I hate fundraising, okay? But I believe that people will maybe donate if it's a direct action that you're doing to make an impact on somebody's life. Or so that's always been my dream, right? After October 7th, how do we impact somebody's life directly? But you know what? That distance and the lack of empathy for Israeli suffering of being under missile fire, all of this time, fear every day. I live surrounded by forests constantly. There's this, who's out there in the middle of the night? You just don't know, because you hear of the infiltration in a neighboring community and you never know. You never know. Just like in America, You actually never know who your enemy is. There are terrorists potentially anywhere, but you're not allowed to say so. Also, because of radical empathy for the other, never allowing ourselves an empathy for ourselves.
Well, I will say the good news to this is many, many, many millions of dollars have flowed from the American Jewish community to Israel in the past year. Countless
Certainly.
millions, more than ever, I think, in history, for precisely those reasons. I was just at the GA, which is the big Jewish conference with thousands of people, and speaker after speaker after speaker spoke about Israel and spoke about how their local federation had sent millions to Israel for all sorts of humanitarian care. The FIDF is one of the most successful charities. I mean, I don't know if Israelis are aware of how much money flows to the IDF from the diaspora, but it is enormous.
I would
And
have to
those
push
things,
back on that.
but I just want to put those things on the table because I don't want Israelis to think that the diaspora, I mean, there's obviously a part of the diaspora community that is not involved in this, but the organized Jewish community has been very much there for Israel since October 7th. The question
So
that you ask is how you change the minds of those who haven't been, and that's a really hard one.
And here's one of the other dilemmas, which is why is it that Israelis don't know? And yes, actually, in Israel, we do get a lot of the news of the big dollars that are donated, and then it raises questions. If all of these dollars are being donated, why is A, B, and C not being done? Why are we having to field requests from these units who say that they never receive assistance? And again, we're not going to dissect those on the ground dilemmas that we're facing, but do you ever feel that there is some sort of a gap between those who are involved in the organizations and, shall we say, the every Jew, as I call us, the person who isn't necessarily affiliated, they don't have a community, they're really lonely right now, and they're afraid, right? So, do you think there's a way to bridge the gap? There seems to be a gap, and it's also a gap of leadership and a gap of activism on a grassroots level. What do you think is the answer in that of repairing the Jewish world right now at a time where it's very divided because of politics, where they're very much questioning Israel's integrity, even if they have all the evidence and the facts, as you said, facts don't matter. How can we increase for the next phase? Because the money came in for the first year of the war that has now dissipated, yet we are still living in war. How do you think we can continue to perpetuate the compassion of our shared heart as the Jewish nation in the next phase of what's coming?
Well, you've asked lots of questions in that one question about the gaps between Jews and non-Jews. How do you continue the empathy? And I think, I mean, they're actually, I agree with you, they're actually all one question, even though there are many questions. And also, I think for people who don't normally hear this, if you can hear in your voice the sense of almost like despair of we're still going through all of this, while and I think that one thing that most American Jews don't realize, that I felt when Evan said that about don't knock, is like day to day to day to day, American Jews do not feel the horror and dread and anxiety of the hostages still being gone, of their children being on the front lines, of their neighbors' children, of a friend of mine who told me that he went to 5 shivas within a 3-block radius of his house, all soldiers that had died in one action. And all of this, it's like, how do you get, I agree, American Jews to feel even a scintilla of the enormity of this experience for their brothers and sisters in Israel? And all I can tell you is speeches and videos and documentaries and all of that, they only go so far. And really, I think, as you hear even from my own experience, unless you actually talk to Israelis and you know what people are going through, and they hear like what your listeners are hearing in your voice, unless people actually hear that, it's very difficult. Like, I know, let's change the scenario completely. I know what's going on in Ukraine. Do I feel what's going on in Ukraine for Ukrainians? I don't. because I don't really know Ukrainians and I don't hear from them, this is what I'm going through. So I know abstractly and I can feel abstractly, but to have the real human empathy, you have to know real humans. And so, I mean, that's part of the irony that I know you will appreciate, and I know you will share my sort of wry sadness about this, is what you saw on campus. That wasn't really empathy. They don't know what Palestinians are going through or what they've been through or what they're going. It was largely performative, and it was successfully performative because they got attention and they got press and they got to thumb their nose at whatever they thought of as the establishment and so on. But to actually know people who are suffering, that's what teaches you what's going on. And so I hate to revert to my answer before, but we need more Israelis here to tell the story and more American Jews there to see the story. And without that, it's really hard to break through that wall of distance.
It's I can't decide whether it's despairing or not. You know, there's a logic to it, but then again, we
Yes.
know that there's also a logic to the hate that fuels so much of what we're experiencing now. And I think that part of
I just want to say, like, remember, all you listeners, remember, this is drawing on well springs of thousands of years. You know, I say to audiences all the time, Germany started 2 world wars. Nobody ever said, that's it, no more Germany. We're done with Germany. What the China does to the Uyghurs, nobody says, no more China. Or Myanmar to the Rohingya, nobody says, you know what, we shouldn't have a Myanmar. The only country in the world that people say shouldn't exist happens coincidentally to be the only country inhabited by people whom people have hated for thousands of years. So this isn't, I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. It's just an explosion of a very old phenomenon. And that's why the answers to it are really not easy.
Especially if you have a general Jewish population who is very unaware of the old phenomenon and basically convinced that they're living either in a geographic or a geographic time or and place that they're going to be immune from what happens everywhere else throughout Jewish history. I remember you had quoted Elie Wiesel in one of your pieces that when he said an anti-Semite is somebody who hates me before I was born.
Exactly. What a beautiful line. I mean, it's a terrible line, but it's a beautiful line.
It is, but it also, if you look at it, it shows why even our own people do not have empathy for ourselves. It's almost like there is such a logic that has been made acceptable to the rational mind as to why you can hate the Jew, that the Jew can hate the Jew and be okay with it. So we're really lacking in any type of again, those who are active, those who are giving, those who are doing, that's phenomenal. And we are so grateful for that population of the Jewish world in America and everywhere who are active. They are vocal. I think that there is a large percentage of people who are waking up to realize that they are surrounded by people who hate them before they were born. They do not know how to say it out loud. They do not know what to do. They don't know where to turn, and they're not willing to go to a Jewish space because that increases the threat that they might feel against them. What would be your advice to them?
My advice to them, honestly, is that you cannot live anything like a good life if you don't have courage. Courage is the indispensable value to lead a decent life. Without courage, you're a slave. And if you're afraid to be who you are, if you cower, your whole life is lived as a slave. And in the 21st century, for a Jew to live that way is an unspeakable disgrace. And you just have to have the courage to be who you are. And the weird thing about courage is that it is contagious. That if you have courage, people respect you more, and other people will take courage from your courage. It really is true that when you stand up and are who you are, you get more respect. So here's one of the things that you know, and I know, that American Jews don't always know, is you often hear, you know, why doesn't Israel have better PR? And one of the reasons why Israel doesn't have quote unquote better PR is because the messages that you have to send to America are very different from the messages that you have to send to your neighbors. To your neighbors, you have to send messages of we are strong and we will take no, you can fill in the blank, right? To America, you have to send the messages of, oh, we all embrace peace and we love peace and we really love our neighbors and so on. But in the world, you have to stand up and have courage and have strength. And if you don't, then you won't survive. And for thousands of years, the Jews were the ones who said, we're different from you. We know that you will persecute us. We know that you won't like us. We know that you will never leave us alone until we become like you. And yet we are not going to become like you. We're not going to become like you religiously. We're not going to become like you culturally. And we're going to speak our own language. And that's just who we are.
And even when we become like you, you're still going to find the
that's
logical
also true. When we become like you, it won't help. Yes, that is totally true. When we become like you, it won't make any difference. But
it doesn't make any difference. And so what can we do?
So what we do is we take courage from our ancestors and we stay who we are. And will that solve all the problems? No, but it is the only way that we'll be able to live decently in this world.
I think that the courage that we're seeing Israel put on display and trying to the best of our ability to demonstrate that strong fist that is needed amongst our neighbors is not well received by the world, partly because the diaspora Jewish community has a hard time digesting that ideal of the strong, courageous Jew themselves. The same reality happened in each instance in Jewish history when there was friction between the Jewish communities on how to respond to persecution, and leaders were guiding in one way or another. You know, many people said, you wrote yourself, that Elie Wiesel was, a voice of conscience for all of humanity. Is there any leader that we should be or could be listening to today that would help us?
Here's the thing that Wiesel did so successfully. He was strong, but he also spoke in tones that were not antagonistic to other human beings. And that's when I said that about, and I will repeat it even though people won't like it, when I said that about some of the things that some of the government officials have said, they've been needlessly antagonistic in favor of like rallying the boys. And I think that that's hurtful and they shouldn't do that, because I don't think that diaspora Jews actually dislike Israel's strength. I think they're proud of Israel's strength, most of them. Not all, but most of them are proud of Israel's strength. And I wish that someone were articulating that strength in the way, I think of the great spokespeople that Israel used to have. And by the way, there was never a better spokesperson than Netanyahu. I remember watching him on Nightline years ago, and he was beyond description. That's how good he was. And I wish I had the Netanyahu of Nightline on Nightline today, because he would be able to explain in ways that I can't, that others can't, just how much this is, as much as it looks like a war of offense, that it's actually a war of defense, and that it is essential, and also that as people see, it's the only thing that has brought the Abraham Accords and is bringing Saudi Arabia to want to have an agreement with Israel. And remember, Egypt didn't come to an agreement with Israel until Egypt was defeated in the 73 war. And that's, you have to let people know that your antagonism towards us will not work. And until they're absolutely convinced that it will not work, that's the only time people are ready to make peace with their enemies. As long as they think, oh, I might have a chance to destroy that state, then you get constant war. So I don't think, it's hard for American Jews to realize that, because we live in such a different world. That's why I think, by the way, European Jews and Jews from Latin America tend to understand this better, because they live in a world that has much more regular antagonism and states that are next to each other and enemies on borders and things like that. American Jews have a lot of learning to do about this.
Well, you know, back a decade ago, 2 decades ago, when we were starting to call out these waves of propaganda that were starting to grow all around us. I remember in my days at Boston University with the professor, you know, this was the onset of much of what we're seeing, flames that are burning today. When I would call it out, I too was told, no, you're being antagonistic.
Right.
You're being paranoid. No, nothing's going to happen here. Now we have from LA, Chicago, DC, New York, London, Amsterdam, Berlin, Paris, and this is all just in
Yes.
within the last week. You know, it's not going to disappear.
No, it is not going to disappear. I wish that I could be optimistic in the short term, but I'm not optimistic in the short term. In the long term, I'm only optimistic because I have faith. But in the short term, it's really hard to be optimistic. And in part because, look, I quote this all the time because I think it's so powerful. Ayaan Hirsi Ali was brought up in Somalia. And she said once, when I grew up in Somalia, I didn't know a Jew. And I didn't even know anyone who knew a Jew. But I knew Jews were evil. Now, if that's true for someone in Somalia who has no contact, just imagine what all these immigrants to Europe, what kind of atmosphere they grew up in. And some of the people on American college campuses, what that Middle Eastern influence does to the culture of Europe or the culture of the campus, because these are people who grew up like being weaned on anti-Semitism. And it takes a long time and a lot of work. And by the way, I know I can think of one person in particular, one like prominent Muslim figure in America who calls himself a reformed anti-Semite and speaks out against anti-Semitism in the Muslim community. And he gets death threats all the time, all the time. So yeah, this is an enormous, as I said, an enormous civilizational battle.
It's a spiritual battle as well, I believe. And
Yes.
I think that Jews have to face that within
But I'll say
themselves.
this, you know, we say all the time, "B'chol dor vador omdim aleinu l'chalotenu," which is in every generation they arise against us to destroy us. But the same Seder, we also say, "B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim." In every generation, a person should see themselves as though they came forth from Egypt. So there's redemption as well as hatred. And that's part of what we should be recognizing is, look, for our ancestors, the idea that there was an Israel even to be, insulted and attacked and despised is a miracle beyond their imaginings. So we also have to be very grateful for the strength of Israel, for the ingenuity of Israel, for the fact that Israel is an ally of the United States, all those things. I don't want us to leave the conversation without expressing gratitude to God for the blessings that we actually do have, which our ancestors could not have begun to imagine. And for that, I'm really enormously grateful. And one of the things I always say to American Jews is, you're the first generation in thousands of years to be able to visit in Israel. How can you not go to Israel? How can you go to the Riviera and not go to Israel? I don't understand it.
Well, I think that it's high time for that silver lining of the catastrophe of October 7th to continue to shed a light for Jews around the world on what it means to them. We've come out of, shall we say, the year of mourning. Now we have to turn it into a year of meaning. What are we going to translate in our own lives in order to learn from the courage of whether they are all flawed, all of our leaders, but to learn from the courage being enacted by our leaders to take the actions necessary to unroot the tyranny of terror and to make sure that we're applying some of that courage into our own lives. I am very grateful for the opportunity to talk with you because I know you've inspired many as a rabbi. You're no longer at a pulpit, but do you feel like you're still teaching and still a part of that spiritual battle people are fighting within themselves right now?
So first of all, let me just say that you've just given me a great title for an article, from a year of mourning to a year of meaning. I mean, how beautiful is that? That's beautiful. I love that.
Thank you. I use it often. That's a part of what Israel Forever is trying to do, to make sure that the catastrophes that fall on Israel are not a part of what we carry on forever, only as memory, but that the meaning, and this is what Israel Forever was designed for. This is what I have built my life towards, following in the footsteps of my master, so that I can actualize his lessons for other people, so I can make sure that Elie's echo is heard generation after generation. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to explore these topics with you, because I can see, I can hear that you have that kind of inspiration that hopefully will also continue to be a guide as it continues to get worse. We're going to create a year of meaning, but it's going to be simultaneous to a year of increased tragedy.
Yes.
And if we don't just say it out loud, I'm not being antagonistic, and I'm not being Islamophobic, and I'm not being anti this. No, we have seen the patterns of history with Israel in existence. It will mitigate some of that danger, but it will not stop it. The war that we're fighting here is the war for all of Jewish existence, but the war that you're fighting there is a very different war. And I'm really worried. And we have to keep giving courage and help people, what we call at Israel Forever, help diaspora Jews be Israel strong.
Yes.
Get self-defense training, get mental resilience training, do the things you need to do to make the dialogues, Rabbi, that you think are the answer. They're only possible if we can have people feel it from within, not only with the facts and the knowledge in their pocket, but with the passion that we've been able to inherit from the leaders before us, we've learned from.
That's beautifully put. And I would say, in answer to your question, yes, I do feel like I mean, not having a synagogue, I work at the Maimonides Fund. I do some work for the ADL. I go around the country and speak. I still occasionally speak at my synagogue. But it's not like and also with social media, it's not like my platform has gotten smaller. And so I do feel the sort of chizuk, the encouragement of the Jewish community here that cares, and also, of course, of the state of Israel. And you're right, American Jews in general, I think, don't realize how much their world is different because there is an Israel, even if it's not part of their day-to-day consciousness. They're different as Jews because they have an Israel. They don't know what it was like before there was an Israel. The sense of being the people that really doesn't have any place that is their own. So even, I almost want to say, even when Jews are upset with Israel or ashamed of something Israel did or yelling at Israel, I want to say to them, that's all a tribute to the fact that you have an Israel. Like, it's almost like who can embarrass you? Your own family, right? Other people's parents don't embarrass you. Only your own family embarrasses you. So if Israel embarrasses you, it's because of your family. That's why they embarrass you. And it's just, that's the reality. I mean, it's family.
Well, let's continue to build as many bonds as we can for our family, far and near. Let's do what we can to help people be inspired and informed. This has been very enlightening.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for the dialogue, and I look forward to doing it again.
You got it. It's a date. You be well. Thank you so much, and stay safe out there.
Bye-bye.
Bye.